Okay, well, we're going to go right on. We have Congresswoman Slaughter here in the audience with us. We would consider her the #1 supporter in Congress for high-speed rail. She's been working years in Congress to help make this happen. She helped get the Congressional Caucus going on high-speed rail, which was bicameral and bipartisan, which is a feat in itself. And so we would like to call you up to the podium and Congresswoman Slaughter. Thank you so much for joining us.
And thanks to all of you. I'm so happy to be back here. This is one of my favorite groups, as you know. Since I saw you last, I fell in some bad infrastructure and broke my femur in New York City. And I was lucky in that the surgeon that I got at Lenox Hill Hospital does work on NFL players. So this is a man who really knew how to fix a femur. But we had some great conversations. They told me at Lenox Hill that 80% of the orthopedic disasters in New York City are attributable to bad infrastructure. That should speed us on, brothers and sisters. We've got a lot of work to do. But I thank you for welcoming me here this afternoon. I certainly thank Andy Coons and Tom Hart for inviting me here today. It is great to be with you and a true pleasure to work with you year after year. I love knowing you're out there with the strong advocates for the high-speed rail. Now, I'm especially pleased to be able to speak with you on the eve of the President's State of the Union address. The President will address our nation about the challenges facing our country and the path forward towards a brighter future. It is my firm belief that a brighter future and more prosperous future includes robust investments in infrastructure and high-speed rail. As we know all too well, we've been through some challenging times as a country and advocates for high-speed rail. We're still facing an economy that's struggling to rebound, but we are on our way from the greatest economic crisis since the Great Depression. And meanwhile, we've spent more than a decade of war in Afghanistan and trillions of dollars. And we are building infrastructure in other people's countries while we ignore the needs we have of our own, of roads and bridges and railroads crumbling and airports almost disgraceful. I don't think anybody comes into the nation's airports now, having come from some of the major cities in Asia or Europe, without being somewhat surprised. And again, talking about New York City, which is in my state, the entrance into New York City, often with those gypsy cabs, can be very humbling. In Washington, the advocates for transportation infrastructure have faced a hostile contingent in Congress that's tried to slash the funding for Amtrak and has stopped a full 5-year surface transportation bill, which probably hasn't happened since George Washington's day, from passing through Congress. And I mentioned to you last year, while these challenges may have slowed our progress, it has not lessened our determination to realize the dream of American high-speed rail. Indeed, while progress has been slow, we've continued to move forward with projects from California to Illinois and New York. With each project, we are seeing rail travel in the United States come back to life. In my hometown, Rochester, New York, we have continued to make progress on a new intermodal train station that will serve as the new hub of the region's transportation infrastructure. The state-of-the-art station will be designed to welcome high-speed trains to Rochester and bring us one step closer to the day when a trip from New York City to Rochester will take less than 4 hours. And that would be a wonderful day, but we would really appreciate it if we could get from Rochester to Albany in less than 4 hours. I know you've heard me say this before, but the second, third, and fourth largest cities in the state of New York have no way to access the state capital unless they go on the train or drive. And to go on the train is to show enormous amounts of patience because we share the track with CSX. And so we don't really know when we're going to leave, and we certainly have not much of an idea when we're going to arrive. But despite that, the ridership on that train increases every year. Over the past 5 years, the train ridership in just Rochester has increased 88%. This year alone, ridership increased by another 9%, with 144,000 people using our facilities in Rochester. By 2035, we expect that number to double easily. But so much needs to be done to bring us back from years of neglect, but it is happening. This year in New York State alone, more than $100 million of work will get underway. Ground will be broken on new stations, new track will be laid, and crossings and bridges will be made safer. I am not by nature a patient person. In fact, I don't even like to say that word. We see the enormity of the work that we are doing, but I don't think that it should take 6 or 8 years for us to lay track across upstate New York. And I think as this country, we ought to really be able to speed up what we're trying to do in the renewal of our infrastructure and to rebuild America. It takes far too long. The arguments on behalf of high-speed rail are well known to everyone in this room. And while we know the facts and figures supporting high-speed rail, it is easy to become discouraged in the face of seemingly overwhelming opposition to our plans. Now, while we're not there yet, the last thing we can do would be to turn back. Too much is going to be lost if we do, and it's up to the people that I serve with in Congress to make sure we don't do that. If we give up, our highways will continue to clog, our airports will continue to bottleneck with frustrated travelers. If we give up, our nation will continue to depend on imported foreign oil and endanger our national security as we secure the resources we need to keep millions of cars on the road. And if we give up, our nation will lose the jobs of the future to countries like China, Germany, Japan, and of course Europe, the rest of Europe, which is so far ahead of us. So we cannot and we will not turn back now. We're very excited in Rochester to be ready to start a new railroad station, although they do tell me it was several years in the future before we will have it. The railroad station in Rochester, New York, was built about 45 years ago as a temporary station. During all those years, it has never been ADA compliant, and it's really pretty dreadful. But despite that, as I said a while ago, the ridership is climbing on a yearly basis to astronomical heights for us. And I know that once we show people, once we start the building, once we start to lay the track, once the things happen, that this country is going to feel once again that we are going to try to reclaim the America we all know and love. So thank you for letting me come again this year. Next year, I hope to see this room absolutely full and that we will have some money in a budget for high-speed rail, upward and onward. Thank you. Thanks, Andy. Well, sure. We
can take a few questions.
Yes. Right.
Come with the mic.
To also take a train to Albany or New York City, and so I share your concerns. I mean, all the hurdles that come out from Albany, not only Washington and so on. I applaud you for your efforts. I don't have a real question except to say carry on, because all the people in upstate New York are with you.
We will.
Yeah.
And you know the chambers of commerce all along upstate New York and along that corridor have been enthusiastic about this for a number of years. I'm glad that we're finally going to be able to lay some track. The first thing we'll do is fix a bottleneck that has been in existence for 100 years around Albany, between Albany and Schenectady. That's our first project, and that by itself will move transportation along. But why in the world should we be the last country almost in the world to really spend money on high-speed rail? How important is it for us to be able to let people work in one town and live in another because they can get there in 40 minutes or less to work? What in the world would stop us from trying to do what we can do in upstate New York, and that would be go up through Canada to Montreal, which is my dream, turn left, go over. At this point, again, while we have no way to fly to Albany, we can't go to Chicago either. That's out of the question unless you go to Charlotte first or maybe Pittsburgh. And we really need to open ourselves up again to the west. The Erie Canal did that. And as far as I'm concerned, high-speed rail is the Erie Canal for this century, and we've got to get it done. So thank you for your comment. I appreciate it very much.
I'd like to ask you a question.
All right.
I know you are the strongest supporter in Congress for high-speed rail. You've created a bipartisan caucus and all that. What can we do, all of us here, the association, all these business companies, everything, to help push the rest of Congress on board with this? Because I know even all the work you've done, it's still a minority of Congress's overall thinking.
It is. I think people don't have a sense anymore that the railroads are coming back, and everybody is astonished when we report the ridership, Andy. They don't believe how much it has grown. Surely to goodness we learned on 9/11 that we had to have that other rung of transportation. we were left in Congress. You know, they grounded all the planes in the country. The best way we could to try to get back home. In my case, going on the train would have taken 10, 12, 15 hours. I mean, it's really absurd that in this century, especially when the United States taxpayers are funding high-speed rail in other countries. I don't think we can stand for that anymore. I was glad to see that we're going to bring more troops out of Afghanistan. I'd like to bring them all home. $2 billion a week for war would have given us a heck of a lot of rail in the United States. So you can see I'm serious. Okay.
We got your back. We're going to help you any way we can from outside.
Thanks, everybody. Best of luck. And come by and see us.
Thank you so much for coming.